Today is joining me Maria Bremner. Maria is the Climate Action and Sustainability Manager at Royal Roads University. She is dedicated to fostering a just, resilient, and equitable future through policy and relationships. At Royal Roads University, she leads the institutional sustainability and climate action. Maria's background includes over 20 years in the public sector, including a variety of roles for the provincial government on environment protection, circular economy, and sustainability. Maria is the author of Cape Scott and the North Coast Trail, hiking Vancouver Island's wildest coasts. She lives on the traditional lands of the Sanic and the Lekwungen ancestors and families in Victoria, BC. And when she's not working, she finds much joy in the woods with her family and on her bike. Maria, thank you so much to be here. I'm going to start with the first question, quoting the World Commission of Environment and Development in relation to the concept of sustainability. And I quote, the development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. But I want to ask you first, from your own perspective, Maria, what does sustainability means to you in your work and life?
Thank you, Yusuf, and thanks for having me here today. This definition has really been part of my sustainability journey since I began. I knew that I wanted to work in the quote environment sector since I was a child. And this definition has sort of carried me through sort of my schooling and academic career and into my professional career as well. But to be honest, it has never really resonated with me. I don't really like it for a few reasons. When I think about development, we're so often in this tension with development and growth being a must have, that yes, we can have the environment alongside the economy hand in hand in this mutual lovely relationship, but development, it doesn't define what kind of development and why, and development for whom, and it's very, in my view, human centric. And it also doesn't articulate needs, and needs can be really bastardized into different views on so whose needs, and needs being, can be very material, or it can be focused on just basic human rights, the rights of nature. So it is a definition that I have found has been used by others, corporate interests, government as well, to say that they're doing sustainability when they're not. And it recognizes the present and the future, but at least in sort of the Western capitalist culture that I'm part of, we definitely don't look and value both our sort of ancestral history as well as an intergenerational perspective on our day-to-day practice and relationship. So one thing that I've really liked as a definition that I've come across is that from the Biomimicry Institute, and it's something along the lines of life creates conditions conducive to life. And so, in our living and our practice, how are our actions and behaviors and attitudes affecting other life, be that life of our neighbors or of the plants and animals around us, or even life on another side of the world? And so, sort of my values around sort of this idea of reverence for life and reciprocity, I think really needs to be embedded. So, long way of sort of your answering your question. I see sustainability as inherent with sort of my value system, but the word itself is very complicated. And I use sort of my own value based approach to sustainability to sort of guide my personal way of living, but also my career choice and path.
Excellent. Thank you so much for sharing that with me, Maria. And now, talking about sustainability and the concept that you mentioned that is related to stop putting ourselves in the center of this and start thinking like worldwide or environmental wide. that relates me to your work in your book, Cape Scott and the North Coast Trail, hiking Vancouver Island, Wildwood Coast. And I noticed that you deliver a guide on how to prepare properly to face the challenge of hiking at this North Coast Trail, right? And this guide is a help if you want to try this trail, right? Now, talking about challenges and preparedness, that is one of the goals I can see you have in your book. In your opinion, what are the biggest sustainability challenges or obstacles faced by individuals or organizations today to integrate this sustainability into their daily practices?
That is a very big question, Yosef. So I feel like I'll have to trouble constraining myself on this answer. I guess one of the big ones, I guess you brought in the book, so maybe I'll talk first about the book and sort of some of the motivations for the book, because I've been a hiker and just love being in nature any chance I get, and so have done a lot of just exploring, particularly around Vancouver Island, and had traveled up to the North Island and that beautiful place where Cape Scott now is, and where the community has turned it into a longer trail. But I really found the historical view and story about the park quite lacking. There's a lot of good celebration of the amazing historic role that the Danish settlers, had up in that place. But there, in my visits to the park, it was almost void of any mention of sort of the indigenous history, and that bothered me, that was not part of it, and even just the story of how the park came to be. And then on the flip side, I also saw the North Island economy, one that had been built on mostly resource extraction in the sort of kind of coal days, mining for coal, but also in more recent days, fishing and logging. But that economy was struggling, and they were trying to build sort of a tourism economy there. So, tourism being sort of perhaps something that could diversify the economy, and wanting to help with that, and just sort of looking for a meaningful project that would contribute in various different ways. So that was sort of the motivation. Just and I kind of tell that story because it's an example of perhaps how we often approach a problem with a superficial understanding of like exactly what's gone into it. But going back to sort of climate and sustainability, it's been called a super wicked problem because it is. There's so many different layers and dimensions to what has brought about climate change, but colonialism and capitalism being some key drivers to that. And so we typically sort of gloss over how that culture still is part of us right now, that we are built on this consumer oriented, hyper individualistic value system that really disconnects us from land and ancestry, and how we're experiencing the problems is very different. So I think that's perhaps one of the challenges, is just the oversimplification of the problem. And then from that, people's sense of agency or lack thereof. It's a very real fact that we are really running out of time, and people in privileged positions like mine, there's often sort of several reactions. One is like to freeze, that this overwhelming grief and sometimes trauma response, and sometimes it's apathy. But being in a position of privilege, we have a responsibility to, with all this information that we have, with the experience that's growing of how climate and sustainability are affecting us, that it's not just sort of our way of life that's at risk. There are indigenous ways of life have been at risk and facing existential threat for as long as the colonial project has been alive. And on the other side of the globe, people who are in just very dire straits, lack of resources, being in war-torn countries, being in effectively servants to Western culture and our kind of place of privilege and mass resource consumption. So seeing the complex problem for what it is, I think, is probably sort of, in short, the largest issue.
Now that you mentioned that, Thank you so much. And I can see a connection with when you answered the question related to the conceptualization of sustainability, because you mentioned the development, right? And I can find a correlation with the challenge that you mentioned to the development. Now, taking in consideration this main challenge, what do you suggest are the best way to overcome these challenges?
Yeah, so I wish I knew, but sort of in my heart, I do feel that relationships are key. We have so much information, we have so much science, thousands of scientists from IPCC telling us what the challenges are. We've known for decades, if not centuries, around the impacts of what this mass destruction of the planet is causing. So I don't think it's an informational problem. So I do think it's culture based and it's power based, and overcoming those is means reaching out and developing networks, alliances, a community of practice with others, and a willingness, I think, as well, to not turn away, to sort of, as Vanessa Andriotti says, staying with the trouble and doing it in a way that resonates with people's own sort of values and mindsets, whether that's sort of what they see on a day-to-day basis, if there's a local solution or local group that they can respond and have an impact for. I feel like those are very strong on ramps to greater action and activism. And I think the other part is recognizing that to change culture and to struggle for rights takes a long time. And we are so conditioned to immediate gratification in our culture and not seeing ourselves as part of a larger movement. And I think having a bit of humility with that sense of we are small movers and agents in a larger shift that's taking place. And that's where I think agency with others is perhaps the biggest strength-based approach that I can see.
Thank you so much. And now, as a climate action and sustainability manager at Royal Roads University, how do you conduct these sustainability actions to foster a just, resilient, and equitable future?
We try. I try. I guess there's a few ways that I perhaps would highlight it. One is, and I kind of just maybe go back to my beginnings as sort of a youth and young university person. It was very much my interest in sort of sustainability was very much grounded in my love for the planet, for the environment, for birds and trees in my backyard, and just kind of feeling this sense of loss around that. But I feel that as I've sort of matured in this space, I just have a greater and growing concern around the justice component, where I have a greater recognition of growing up as a privileged person, as a person with access to means, and seeing a very strong need and demand to build in equity and diverse perspectives and participation into the approaches. So, sort of at Royal Roads, I guess an example would be we host a climate week last year, and the main theme was we need to elevate voices that are not part of the conversation. So actively trying to bring in those voices to the podium, for lack of a better word, and allow those voices to speak. So we had indigenous voices, we had voices from artists who were activists, we had looking at how community can participate in approaches that perhaps aren't conventional techno approaches. We've been doing that as well with our climate risk assessment, really trying to have a strong participation from the community and trying to also prioritize voices of people who feel disproportionately affected by climate impacts and risks. We also spend a lot of time, thinking about how we can bring people together differently, from that, I talked about sort of solutions, bringing to get people together, not around like what are the solutions, but more acknowledging what some of the problems are and sitting a little bit more with our role in those problems and our emotional response and sort of individual sense of agency. So brought together, circles of conversation as well as stewardship clubs to get people active and out on the land on the campus here at Royal Roads, but also, connecting with each other too. So where there's a lot of relationships that can be fostered that way. And then I think another big thing with, my philosophy at my work is just that this work can't reside in an office of sustainability. It has to really be distributed across the organization. So while my office can play a catalyzing role or a coordinating role, we really want active involvement from everybody. And I feel that it really is sort of the future of sustainability offices, that it's no longer enough to have a sustainability office and tick that box. Like, you really need to embed it throughout the organization, be that in your policy, your practices, not just your marketing, but and also in the purpose of your organization and your company. We're in higher education, so what is the purpose of higher education? Instilling kind of that abilities and capacities of people to go out in their professional worlds or their personal worlds and have the courage to make a difference. So I think a lot of those kind of themes and elements and values sort of guide the work. I feel heartened by the fact that there is this growing recognition that triple-legged stool, going back to the kind of beginning of this conversation, the social, the economic, the environment, that's a flawed perspective, and we really need to be embedding this around, like this wrap around view, that it touches on absolutely everything within our life, be it healthcare, be it how cities are planned, be it how visions are developed for future entrepreneurial ideas, whatever it is. We have to shift sort of the culture that's at the heart of how we're kind of moving this beast of an economy forward.
Thank you. And now that you're saying that, I am sure there are some change makers in the process. And actually, my next question is based on that. What do you consider could be a big motivator to promote the change makers, keep inspired to be part of this conversation?
So I struggle with this every day. I've heard it also talked about, sort of, it's not a sprint, it's a marathon. And then, well, it's not a marathon, it's something else. And there's a climate psychologist, Britt Ray, who kind of, I recently went to one of her talks, and she said it's not a marathon, it's a relay race. So this need or recognition that you can't be operating at a high level of concern and agency all the time, or you will burn out. You will fry and sizzle, and that will be the end of you. And so find people in your network that you can spell off with, and that they can take the baton and keep moving with it, so that you can energize yourself to take it on again. So that kind of element of personal overwhelm and sustainability and resilience, really recognizing that as a structure of how you work, so that you're kind of operating in that bandwidth of what's doable, slowing down and doing less, quote unquote, less, from the sense of productivity, but greater emphasis on the quality of that work, or how that legacy, a quote unquote legacy of our work. We're not really looking for that kind of gold star. We're actually looking for, as a sort of a, how we are in good relationship with others. Measuring that is very difficult, but you can measure it, I think, from the heart, and knowing how that work is congruent with sort of your own ethic. It's very hard to kind of tackle these issues every day and then see the continued demise. So overwhelm is really big, but energy of other people for me is something that keeps me going and makes me feel less isolated, and also brings my creativity out more, like the idea sharing with others, and just that kind of additional accountability. And I think that there's a lot of values in our day-to-day world, whether it's an organizational culture or family culture or business, where we really value productivity, and we are certainly not moving fast enough on a productive level on sustainability and climate. Again, going back to sort of this longer idea of a longer race, that it's not just who we are as individuals that's going to save us, but this sort of broader, longer practice of living, and recharging batteries with simple ways within sort of our own practice, be that like a walk in the woods or taking some time to just really feel the love from nature and feel your own humility as sort of you as an individual in this space. Because I think when you take that time, you realize that you also can't do this, you can't leave this work. It's a sort of a moral responsibility, and a need to sort of feel and in relationship with the world and help shift humanity to a better practice and way of being.
And based on your professional experience as manager in climate action and sustainability, do you think there are some actions that you are implemented today can be transferred to other fields?
Yeah, I think so. Like I talked about, sort of like really this mantra that sustainability can't just be in one office. I see trends, in sort of purpose driven business cultures and organizations, that there is this larger recognition and also this larger desire of people to be involved. And I would hope, and I do feel that the organizational culture will change, but there does need to be some legislated accountability and some severing of ties from, say, political interests and interests of large multinational corporations who have power and profit in mind. The value system of people who work within those companies or who work within those organizations, I think if we bring those people together, those voices can have a greater impact. And I think that there is greater, through legislation and otherwise, greater expectations on that equity and diversity that will shift the conversation. We're in an era of information, and sometimes that is very beneficial to us in that organizations who make commitments can be held to account on those. And there's a greater emphasis on, greenwashing and paying attention to what that is. So yeah, I do think that there's elements of all of my pieces of work, whether it's sort of how we work with colleagues in the organization, to sort of just the requirement or demand to just continually not do better on a performance level, but do better in a accountable level, where that the how we are moving and the commitments we're making in this space are seen to be having action. So we will see, obviously time will tell, but also, as I mentioned, it's hard to track progress when you're also, the sky seems to be falling. We have the sense that, and we know it's just through science, that we are not keeping pace with this sort of nature and climate emergency. So I get heartened by sort of larger spaces of activism, but I'm interested as well as sort of like the activism of organizations and what's role that they can play in the public space.
Excellent. And we're close to finish this interview, Maria. And I want to ask, can you share your hopes and aspirations for integrating these sustainable practices into daily living?
I guess my hopes is that this movement, this culture change, will continue to accelerate and gain traction, and the communities of people involved in this will grow in confidence and strength, and that the role of those communities will also be to allow other voices to be heard that aren't being heard right now. So I think that that would be my hope.
And how do you believe these practices can impact our personal lives and a broader community?
Yeah. So in terms of personal lives, I think there is an opportunity for people to find deeper relationships and more community. I think this is our shared existence is of as common of a interest as you can get. And it's really exciting to see so many different initiatives and causes convening around this, whether it's like food security and growing gardens in a community, or it's people looking to kind of support their municipality and making some courageous decisions about the elimination of fossil fuels as sort of part of buildings and development, or it's people getting out and removing invasives and supporting biodiversity in their neighborhoods. Like there's a lot of opportunities for people to find connection and purpose at the same time. So I think that's a really positive thing that we can look forward to. And as people struggle with affordability of living, or mental and physical health challenges, or just greater demands on their lives, having a connected community will help us weather those challenges and see people for the sort of sentient beings that they are, that that person who's struggling on the streets is a human just like you, with feelings. And so seeing some relationship with that will combat that sort of closing down that I think just mass information and mass media has brought upon us.
Excellent. And to close this interview, do you have any suggestion or concerns about sustainability practices that we might have missed during the interview?
I think I, in general, touched on all of them. I think just the general premise around sort of there not being one solution to this, that there's interventions at all scales and levels that people can get involved in and do something. And it's the act of doing something for the betterment of environment or society will lead to other positive things. They often say like the antidote to despair is action, or an antidote to hope in action. So this empty hope is just hoping and sitting there and hoping that things will get better. But through action, we derive greater hope and greater motivation. So it's this positive cycle that combats that thing that I talked about with climate change. It's not an informational problem. We have so much information. You're like, I don't know what to do. There's so many bad facts here and so many different things I need to be doing. But just start doing something. And I think the other part, that concerning thing that I've noticed, is just with this larger swell of interest around climate and what can I do, there's a more disturbing trend of subtle greenwashing that's kind of more climate denialism, which is around sort of casting doubt on what the real problem is, or pointing all the problem to the individual. Like, you too can turn your thermostat down, which is important, but it distracts from some of the real problems. So I think that would be one of my concerns, that as sort of our society gets more interested and sophisticated, that we also stay vigilant. So for some of that sort of delay, distraction, doubt that kind of gets sewn in throughout marketing and communications, or even corporate approaches to quote unquote sustainability.
Dear Maria, thank you so much. I sincerely appreciate the time and effort you dedicate today. I am confident that your message will deeply connect with the audience, and this might be a motivator to them to implement your valuable insights. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much for having me, Yusuf.